Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Joe Rogan has been talking here and there about the Epstein files ever since this recent drop of them. And what a lot of people are demanding from him, including his audience, is that he address the fact that his rotating cast of guests, at least a certain portion of it, are pretty close with Epstein. And so that only adds to the impression that is growing that over the years, Joe Rogan has come to be acquainted with a lot of really powerful and really palpably right-wing figures. So it's becoming clear to at least a portion of Joe Rogan's audience that he wants to kind of avoid that part of the subject. And Joe has been saying, I was in the Epstein files because I didn't want to go meet Jeffrey Epstein and I refused. But he is not addressing head on the fact that there was seemingly some kind of influence operation that used his podcast in order to kind of launder these people to his very enormous audience. And so he's had some weird guests on in talking about this. He initially had this guy, Mike Benz, who was kind of a weird internet operator himself. Then he had RFK Jr.'s wife, who is in the Epstein files as having had dinner with Epstein. She literally knew Epstein, so he did it again. And now he has this guy whose name is Michael Malice, who looks very bizarre, and I'm just gonna let you see it for yourself. And this guy's strange. It took me a second to figure out what's going on with this dude, because when you look him up, it just says that he's an anarchist. And so it's like, okay, but really he's closer to like anarcho-capitalist. You know, he's another one of these right-wing guys who comes from this sphere of influence. He interned at the Cato Institute. He wrote an article about how America should be dissolved, which is an anarchist argument to make, but his argument is that America never fully reconciled like the issue of the South versus the North in the Civil War. And he's not making that argument from a left-wing perspective. That's all I'll say. But he does seem to be kind of a weird, idiosyncratic type of dude. I'm not sure exactly what's up with him, but he's clearly on the right-wing side and agrees with Joe on most things. And they talk about Zohran Mamdani, they talk about Democrats in general, and they talk about the Epstein files and Trump specifically. So I wanted to show you all of these things just to give you a sense of how differently he talks about these different political figures. It's really actually quite striking how the difference in levels of charity that he gives different politicians based on what their actual policies are. So here's him and this weirdo talking about Zohran Mamdani.
A record $127 billion budget proposal on Tuesday. The socialist city leader's plan includes a whopping 9.5% proposed property tax hike. 9.5 hike on New Yorkers, which he claims would be a last resort, while allocating another $1.2 billion for migrants.
But the point is, it's still,
it says it's up $11 billion from the current year.
It's still a proposal, though. He hasn't passed it.
Well, he's not. Yeah, he's a fucking psychopath. Like,
you see,
the amount for migrants is crazy. There should be $0 for illegal immigrants.
But zero. I don't think you can have zero, because if they're going to be there, they're going to be. You have to feed them. You have to do something with them.
So what's the solution for New York after this guy's out? Do you think that it ever turns around, or do you think it keeps going in the same general direction? And do you think the powers that be want it to go in this general direction?
New York has these, I don't know what the cycle, for Giuliani to win, you had to have a Dinkins. You know, for Obama to come in, you had to have a Bush. So here's the other problem. There's two issues. One is a lot of people who could left. There didn't used to be a plan B for New York, because New York was its own thing.
Now it's Florida.
Or Austin.
Yeah.
And New York isn't New York anymore, because Fran Lebowitz, my second favorite public speaker, she had this point. She goes, look, there's a lot of things you could say about a city that's full of rich people. You could say it's good. You could say rich people are bad. You can't say it's interesting. And unless there's a space for young people who have nothing to lose, who are going to bring culture and innovation, artists, broadly speaking, not just little painters, but artists. But you can't do that anymore.
No.
So, and I don't think under this guy, there's gonna be that return.
So do you think he's just appealing to this base of disenfranchised young people that have been told that the reason why they have all these problems is rich people are greedy and they've ruined everything, and we should tax the rich and we'll feed the poor.
I think he is speaking to a lot of people. So people on the right think everyone on the left is like a big monolith. They're not. And I think there's a lot of lefties, especially young lefties, who don't think the Democratic Party is an effective mechanism toward resolving their issues and concerns. And he's not. Just like Trump wasn't really a Republican. He's a Republican on paper. He had no allegiance to the Republican Party. He took them all out one at a time. This guy's a Democratic socialist.
So $7.54 billion to fill cliffs across 6 major unbudgeted needs.
They haven't raised property taxes there in over 20 years.
Is that true?
That's what this says. It's 25 years since September.
Well, the
11th.
property taxes are high.
I'm just a point.
But
That's what I'm saying.
I understand they haven't raised it, but they shouldn't raise it.
Because it goes with, as property values go up, the percent's going to go up, the revenue's going to go up as well.
Exactly. There's
It's
no
a
reason to
percentage,
raise it. But like this idea that they haven't done it so they should do it is crazy.
Oh, look at that. So if your condo is 120 grand, which is, no condo is going to be that cheap, you're paying like 15% every year in property tax.
Yeah.
That's not nothing.
That's not nothing. I think the idea is that rich people are just going to pay it. And this is what they're trying to push. Meanwhile, people are going to flee, just like they've done in other countries when they've done these sort of wealth taxes.
But he did do something I liked. So him and Kathy Hochul had this thing where they're trying to streamline, I'm sure there's some catch, to make it easier to build. Because they're understanding if rents are high, increasing supply is going to lower costs. So if they do that, I think that's a great thing, obviously, which I never saw coming.
Right. That's definitely good, but there's still people who are they don't like that kind of leadership. It's spooky.
Okay, so some interesting points being made here, and you can see that Michael Malice is not fully going along with Joe on Zohran Mamdani. Neither of them support him. But Joe is going fully, he calls him a psychopath, and you can see dude's like, is he a psychopath? He's making a more interesting case for some of Zohran's policies, and also accurately explaining why younger people like Zohran, even though it's bizarre to me that Joe doesn't already have an understanding of that, but that just shows how off the pulse he is. And so they're talking about property taxes here, and the right wing has been freaking out about Zohran raising property taxes on high-priced homes, like I think it's like $3 million and above or something like that. And so people are freaking out. This isn't about affordability, and it actually is, because if you raise the property tax on wealthy homes, then that relieves some of the burden on some of the lower income people. That's the point of a progressive tax versus a regressive tax. So essentially, Joe is either in favor of regressive taxation, taxing more on lower income earners, or he wants to do austerity politics and just cut from the budget and lower taxes. So those are very unpopular policies. Not going to get very far with that in New York City. And Zohran, is doing this as a part of his broader project to raise taxes on the wealthy, which is a policy that has to go through Kathy Hochul. So this is a proposal of his for now. And that's ultimately what people don't want, is they don't want the populace to see that by raising the taxes and actually putting that money to work, you can create a better society. People like Joe Rogan are terrified of that policy being proven. And then when Jamie brings up property taxes haven't been raised in 25 years, Joe Rogan says, well, they shouldn't be raised. They're too hot. So that's just the way he thinks. It's the definition of reactionary, not just because he's reactive in that moment, but because the idea of a progressive tax, the very concept of that, is something that Joe Rogan is instinctually opposed to. So that's reactionary politics for you in a nutshell. And that is the reason that Joe Rogan has become what he's become. So moving on, he talks a little bit about Democrats here for a second. He talks about Minnesota fraud and what happened with ICE there. And then that leads into them talking about Epstein and Trump a little bit. So let's get into that real quick, and then we'll keep it going.
Well, they've done an amazing job in Minnesota of distracting people from the Somali fraud by organizing protests against ICE.
Right.
And that's, people need to understand, like, yes, people are upset about ICE. Fact. Unquestionably, just regular people at home that aren't protesting. But that protest is not just organized, it's funded. It's heavily funded, organized. They had signal chats with Democratic congressmen, or Democratic politicians rather, that were involved in this. They knew what they were doing, and they did it because they wanted to distract from the fact that this fraud was being exposed.
Well, I think they would do it regardless, but yes, it certainly serves that purpose.
They totally shifted the narrative.
Yes.
Nobody's talking about the fraud anymore. Everybody's talking about ICE being murderers.
Right.
Yeah.
Hillary's like, Trump's in the files thousands of times. Like, let's have this conversation. She started already.
Right. What does that mean, though, when you're in the file thousands of times? Because he is the guy that was in contact with the FBI about Epstein. He did contact the FBI after Epstein was arrested and thanked them for arresting him and getting him, because that guy was a real problem.
Right.
And he did kick him out of Mar-a-Lago in 2005.
But she's being factual but not truthful. So it is factual that his name is in the files thousands of times. And then you leave it for the person listening to make that conclusion. The other thing that I'm kind of stunned at is there's this belief online that if there's enough agitation, like QAnon, we're all going to have these mass arrests. And I don't see that happening. And I don't think you can do anything to force them to release the really bad stuff if they haven't.
So what else is left? There's 3 million other files that they have.
They said they've released everything.
Well, they also said there wasn't anything.
Right.
You know, when Kash Patel was on here, it's like there's no videos, there's no evidence.
He said this thing before about how ICE, the protests against ICE aren't organic and they're being funded and facilitated and blah, blah, blah. That's just pure cope. Their policies are very unsuccessful and have led to murder on the streets. So here's the thing about the point he's making about ICE, and then we'll get into the Epstein stuff. If you didn't want it to become a distraction that ICE murdered 2 people in the streets of Minneapolis and were carrying out these brutal, horrific raids, and still are, by the way, they haven't stopped. But if you didn't want that to become something that people were distracted by, what Trump could have done was not send 3,000 ICE agents into a small city in order to carry out that type of chaos. That is what led to the distraction happening. And even if you think that the protests were fully inorganic, they were only given an opening because of ICE agents acting fucking insane in a way that your average American, even Joe admits, can look at and say, this is absolutely insane. So that was Trump's response to the allegation of Minnesota fraud, was to send those ICE agents in there. So tell me how that makes sense. And here's the thing. There's 2 points I want to make about this that are very important for people to think about. First of all, if Joe Rogan or Trump wanted the focus to be on fraud from Somalians in Minnesota, then what they could have done was open investigations into that publicly, made a big deal about it, not stop talking about it, go on TV every day, talk about it, make it a big deal. But instead, what Trump wants to do is utilize his authoritarian instinct, which we all knew he had. It was a built-in part of Trump when he was running, when Joe Rogan platformed him and endorsed him. So his response to this is to send boots on the ground, people that he knows are his soldiers that are acting sort of with impunity and with the backing of the administration. And he sends them there to go and enforce what? Enforce immigration laws. Okay, they're breaking immigration laws in many cases, or preventing people from actually getting through the system and going about things the right way. They're not arresting violent criminals, which Joe Rogan has admitted before. That is what they're doing instead of opening investigations into the fraud. And why do you think that is? It's because they think that the right way for them to assert their power is with that authoritarian style enforcement that ultimately just leads to people ending up getting killed and them losing political capital. They lost trust with the public over the way that they responded to Nick Shirley's video about fraud in Minnesota. And also, if you think that these protests are like a broadly funded movement and there's no reason that there's no way that this could be organic, why wouldn't Democrats just be doing that all the time? If Democrats can just make outrage happen and they can make these protests happen, why wouldn't they have already swept Donald Trump out of office using that tactic? Clearly, even if you think that it's funded and facilitated by Democrats or George Soros or whoever, that's only possible because of the misbehavior of ICE. And if you think that that's a distraction from Somali fraud, then that is a distraction that occurred because Trump would rather do authoritarian theater than actually govern. And so then you get this stuff about the Epstein files, and Joe Rogan says something that Brendan Schaub has also been saying, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is the conversation that they've had with each other, that Trump is exonerated by these Epstein files because of a claim that Donald Trump called the FBI after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, not before, the first time, and said, oh, what a good thing that you got this guy. You should look into Ghislaine Maxwell. She's evil. So this was a claim that a sheriff from the area made, saying that Donald Trump called him and said, thank God you got Epstein. You guys should really look into this guy. So it was an FBI document, but he was not in contact with the FBI. And even if he was, he only called them afterwards. So you're saying he knew how horrible everything this guy was doing was, and he didn't tell them until after he was arrested. But of course, the bias that Joe Rogan has already that is being reinforced by what he's seeing in the files is that Trump is innocent. Trump is a good guy. He didn't do anything wrong. Now, that's silly to me. I mean, really honestly look at the character of Trump and ask yourself if it's more likely that he was heroically saying, you really should look into the crimes this man is doing. Or do you think that he got nervous after that guy got arrested and tried to put in some calls to distance himself and say, thank God you got that guy. He's real bad, huh? I mean, what just sounds more like Trump? Be honest with yourself. So anyway, here lies the problem. I mean, you can get into the angles about like the sex trafficking and Joe's association with all of that. But my point is that the reason Joe is so favorable to Trump over somebody like Zohran is very simple. He supports Trump's policy more. This is why he moved to Texas to be governed by Republicans rather than live in California, even though he still lives in a liberal city. He supports regressive taxation. He does not want to be taxed as a rich person, and he wants to be able to exist in society, make a bunch of money, accrue a bunch of money, and not have to invest in the infrastructure of the society around him. And that's really what they're talking about here when they're talking about this stuff with Zohran Mamdani. He's raising the property taxes, which haven't been raised in 25 years. And then this guy is saying, he goes on at length talking about how New York used to be so much better for young, hungry artists and people who are just doing cool things and trying things. Yeah, why do you think that is? It's because the cost of living was lower. People could afford to try things. And so even if you're struggling financially, you still have enough to eat, you still have some breathing room. America's not like that anymore. And especially those big cities are not like that anymore. And it has been decades of neoliberal policy and austerity politics telling us either we have to let corporations come in and try to solve these problems for us, or we have to cut the budgets and we have to just accept that the services that we do have are going to be degraded a little bit in favor of somebody paying less taxes. And the people paying less taxes never seem to be the poorest among us, the working people, you and me. It's always people like Joe Rogan. So to me, that is what is insidious about Joe Rogan and his programming, as well as the Epstein trafficking angle and all of that. It's all terrible when you size it all up. And ultimately, Joe's lack of discernment is one of his major flaws that has allowed his show to become the slop fest that it is. And I'll get back to that in a second. But I think the real thing that people should lock in on when it comes to Joe Rogan and why he's bad, why his programming is bad, and why it's creepy that he's platformed Peter Thiel and all of these other billionaires who are in this circle of people not who are just trafficking kids, but who are trying to figure out how to program society. That is so much of what these guys were talking about. How, from an outside of government perspective, from a private business influencing government perspective, how can we program the social order so that we never have to see any type of popular uprising or face consequences for our crimes? And the reason Joe Rogan's programming is insidious is because he supports policy consistently that is going to uphold people's ability to do that. And his discernment when it comes to not putting himself around billionaires who are just using his platform as a way to launder their own self-interest is what has rotted the core message of his program. So this last clip I'll show you, just to make my last point on the way out here, this is Joe Rogan talking about these AI guys who apparently work with Kill Tony. They apparently make the intros on Kill Tony, which is a comedy show in Austin. I don't watch those. I'm not aware of which ones he's talking about, but he's glowingly talking about these AI quote unquote artists and talking about how they've created essentially a Hollywood movie. He says they created a Hollywood movie and everybody's saying, wow, Hollywood's done. And this is what he was referring to in saying that.
Holy crap.
Whoa. What the fuck? Holy shit. Holy shit.
Yeah, so look, that's very impressive. It's cool looking, but by far, it's more interesting to watch this dude who is considered a viable voice on the public stage, the world stage, watching essentially the equivalent of colors and shapes moving around on a screen with no discernible, nothing is happening. He's saying, he literally said out of his own mouth that this is going to replace Hollywood movies. There's nothing happening on the screen. It's literally slop. It's literally like one rapid scene to another. Now they fall in the ocean. Now he's in a parachute and he's going, whoa, whoa, whoa. So I've made this point before and I'm going to make it again, and I'm going to land on this. Joe Rogan's platform is going to increasingly become this. He does not have enough discernment to decide what is the difference between something that is actually valuable and something that just looks cool. What is the difference between information that is actually valuable and stuff that just sounds true? And as people like Joe get more lost in the slop of it all, I think that's what's going to degrade his audience and his social relevance more than anything. Even aside from the billionaires and the creepiness of it all, I think allowing himself to believe in the slop is what is going to distance him from, popular humanity more than anything else. Not to say there aren't going to be plenty of people who show up for that, but I just think over time it's going to hold up less, and what's going to hold up better is people who are going to more of an effort to verify what they're saying, think through what they're saying, and eventually this reactionary politics is going to fall back again and be replaced by something else. So making sure that the wave of politics that comes after these reactionaries lose their grip on the culture, which is already happening, making sure that it is really based in a solid foundation of information and policy that can actually take things in the right direction is going to be crucial. And it's going to be impossible for a guy like Joe Rogan to stop that when it comes, which is why a guy like Zohran Mamdani scares him so much.
Me too close to, too much to do, the mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.